My husband stole our son's surgery. Money for a luxury vacation with his mistress. I should have known something was wrong when David started coming home smelling like Dior Sauvage instead of his usual Old Spice. But between working double shifts at Memorial Hospital and monitoring Ethan's heart medication schedule, luxury cologne wasn't exactly top of my radar. What was on my radar? The $35,000 in our son's medical account that suddenly vanished 3 weeks before his scheduled surgery. The surgery that would finally fix the hole in his heart that had been slowly growing since he was born. Account access temporarily restricted. Read the Chase Bank app when I tried to transfer the surgeon's deposit. My stomach dropped as I refreshed the screen. 3 years of double shifts, of selling my grandmother's jewelry, of fundraisers at Ethan's elementary school, all gone. I called the bank immediately, heart pounding as I paced our kitchen floor. The customer service representative confirmed my worst fears. The account had been emptied on April 12th by David, the joint account holder. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. April 12th. The day David took that emergency business trip to the Chicago office. The trip he'd been unusually excited about. The trip he'd bought new luggage for. I hung up and immediately called the hospital. Without the deposit, they would have to reschedule Ethan's surgery, pushing it back at least 6 months. 6 months of watching my son struggle to climb a flight of stairs. 6 months of his lips occasionally turning blue during PE class. 6 more months of fear. David came home that night around 8 p.m., whistling as he hung his keys on the hook by the door. I was sitting at the kitchen table. Ethan's latest echocardiogram results spread out before me like a roadmap of betrayal. The casual way he greeted me, the kiss on top of my head, the routine excuse about a budget meeting running late, all of it felt like a performance now. When I quietly asked about Ethan's money, I watched his face carefully. His expression shifted subtly, first confusion, then a flash of panic quickly masked by concern. He launched into a smooth story about the bank freezing the account for suspicious activity, how he'd been meaning to tell me but didn't want to worry me. The lie flowed so naturally that for a split second I almost believed him. Almost. Updated. Thanks for the overwhelming support, everyone. I'm still processing everything as I write this. To those asking if I had any warning signs before this happened, looking back, there were red flags I missed while focusing on Ethan's health. Have you ever been so focused on one crisis that you completely missed another one developing right in front of you? David and I met at Northwestern University during our junior year. He was the charming business major who brought me coffee during my all-night study sessions for nursing exams. We got married right after graduation, bought a modest starter home in the suburbs of Indianapolis, and had Ethan 2 years later. The pregnancy was easy, the delivery was not. Ethan was born with an atrial septal defect, a hole in his heart. The doctors assured us it might close on its own, but as he grew, so did the hole. By the time Ethan turned 5, it was clear he would need surgery. Our insurance would cover most of it, but there was still a $35,000 gap. The deductible plus specialized care not covered by our mid-tier health plan. We opened a dedicated medical savings account, and I picked up weekend shifts at the hospital's urgent care center. David got promoted to regional sales manager at his pharmaceutical company, which helped. Every birthday, Christmas, and work bonus went straight into that account. It wasn't all hardship and sacrifice. David and I still had date nights, usually at Applebee's when my mom could watch Ethan. We took modest vacations to Michigan City Beach, watching Ethan build sandcastles while we discussed cardiac surgeons and recovery timelines. We were a team, or so I thought. The change began about 8 months ago, when David's company hired a new administrative assistant for the executive team. Ashley was 24, a recent Purdue graduate with perfect teeth and the kind of effortless beauty that made me suddenly aware of my perpetual scrubs and unwashed mom bun. David mentioned her only in passing, small, insignificant references that I now realize were his way of normalizing her constant presence in his life. David's hours got longer. His text responses got shorter. When he was home, he was buried in his phone, smiling at the screen in a way he hadn't smiled at me in years. Classic signs, obvious in retrospect. The truth is, I was too exhausted to notice, too focused on Ethan's worsening condition to see the disintegration of my marriage. The cardiologist had finally scheduled Ethan's surgery for May 15th, and all my mental energy was directed toward that date, circled in red on our kitchen calendar. A date that now loomed like a deadline we couldn't possibly meet. As I sat at the kitchen table watching David's face transform from confusion to realization that he'd been caught, I felt an eerie calm descend over me. The kind of calm that comes when panic exceeds your body's ability to process it. I told him I'd spoken with the bank, that I knew he had withdrawn all $35,000 on April 12th, the day of his supposed emergency trip to Chicago. David's demeanor changed completely once he realized I knew. His practiced concern melted away, replaced by a defensive irritation. He poured himself a whiskey, Maker's Mark, a brand he'd previously claimed was too expensive for everyday drinking. The irony wasn't lost on me. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took long sips, avoiding my eyes. When he finally spoke, it was with careful calculation, suggesting there had been pressures at work I couldn't understand, that the Chicago trip had been important for his career advancement. I didn't interrupt him. Instead, I slid my phone toward him, screen displaying an Instagram post I'd found after a frantic hour of searching. Ashley's Instagram, set to public, showing her tanned legs stretched out on a pristine white beach. The geotag read Maldives. And the caption, "Best surprise ever, Charles Blessed Honors Island Life." The date, April 13th. David's jaw tightened visibly. His attempt to explain was cut short by my simple question. What was I supposed to think about our son's $35,000 surgery money vanishing right before his Maldives trip appeared on Instagram? What followed wasn't the dramatic confession scene from a Lifetime movie. It was worse, a gradually escalating conversation where David revealed himself in layers. First came the defensiveness about his workload, then resentment about our lifestyle constraints, followed by a growing bitterness toward the medical bills that had dominated our lives for years. The most chilling moment wasn't a villainous declaration, but rather the casual, almost tired way he eventually admitted that the money was gone, spent, and that Ethan would just have to wait until his year-end bonus in December. The way he discussed our son's critical heart surgery with the same tone he might use for a postponed home renovation project. Throughout this exchange, I'd been slowly reaching for my phone. Not dramatically, not obviously, just the instinctive movement of someone gathering evidence. The recording app had been running since he walked in. 37 minutes of a conversation that revealed not a movie villain, but something perhaps more disturbing, a husband who had gradually grown to resent his own child's medical needs as an obstacle to his personal happiness. When I asked him to leave, he laughed it off at first, then grew incredulous. It was only when I reminded him that the house was technically in my name and played back a snippet of his own words that the reality of his situation dawned on him. He left without the dramatic door slamming I half expected, just grabbed his keys and walked out, leaving me alone with the weight of what had just happened, updated. This is harder to write than I expected. Thank you for all the messages asking about Ethan. He's stable but still needs the surgery. For those suggesting I should have seen this coming with David's personality changes, yes, hindsight is crystal clear. David's been calling non-stop, alternating between threats and tearful apologies. Would you ever be able to trust someone again after they gambled with your child's life? The next morning brought the practical reality of our situation crashing down. Calling in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, I made 2 important appointments, one with a lawyer recommended by my hospital's social worker, and another with Ethan's cardiologist. Patricia Goldstein's law office was in a converted, Victorian house downtown. As she listened to David's recorded conversation, her expression grew increasingly troubled. She explained that what David had done wasn't just grounds for divorce, but potentially criminal misappropriation of funds intended for a minor's medical care. My options weren't as clear-cut as I'd hoped. We could file for emergency divorce with full custody, pursue criminal charges, or both, but none would immediately solve our pressing financial need. Even with a court order to freeze David's assets, the legal process would take time that Ethan's heart condition might not allow. The meeting with Dr. Patel confirmed my fears. Without the deposit, the earliest they could reschedule was November, assuming we could secure the funds by then. He suggested applying to the Children's Cardiac Care Foundation, which provided grants for families in crisis, but warned that approval wasn't guaranteed and the process could take weeks. What followed was a disorienting period of paperwork, phone, calls, and sleepless nights. David alternated between threatening texts about custody battles and desperate pleas claiming he'd made a mistake he could fix. I forwarded everything to Patricia without engaging. The hardest part was explaining to Ethan why Daddy wasn't coming home. Children understand more than we give them credit for. His simple question about his heart money revealed he'd pieced together more than I'd realized. 10 days after discovering the theft, Patricia called with mixed news. The judge had granted an emergency order freezing David's accounts, but the prosecutor wanted to discuss pressing charges, a step I hadn't fully considered the implications of. While part of me wanted justice, another part recognized that a criminal case would create public records that would follow Ethan throughout his life. The legal proceedings moved forward with frustrating inconsistency. Some days brought encouraging progress, others bureaucratic delays. David's company suspended him during their investigation, but dragged their feet providing records. The corporate system that had once protected him now moved with deliberate caution, reluctant to fully condemn one of their own without absolute proof of misconduct. Ashley disappeared from the picture as the company investigation began, transferring to their Seattle office. Office gossip suggested she claimed ignorance of the trip's funding source. Whether true or not, she had the luxury of walking away from the situation that had upended our lives. The Children's Cardiac Care Foundation took 3 weeks to review our application, 3 weeks of checking my email every hour, of calling their office only to be told they were still processing. When approval finally came, it wasn't for the full amount, but $18,000, a substantial help but still leaving us short. My parents contributed their modest savings, $5,000, and my hospital colleagues organized a fundraiser that brought in another $4,000 over several weeks of effort. We were still $8,000 short, but Dr. Patel worked with the hospital's financial department to establish a payment plan for the remaining balance. Ethan's surgery was rescheduled for July 3rd, 7 weeks later than originally planned, during which his condition continued to worsen with increasingly frequent episodes of breathlessness and fatigue. David's employment situation deteriorated gradually, rather than dramatically. The company's investigation concluded with his demotion rather than termination, a corporate compromise that reflected both his misconduct and their reluctance to lose an otherwise valuable employee. His reduced salary and legal expenses forced him to downsize to a small apartment across town. The divorce proceedings dragged on longer than Patricia had initially estimated, complicated by David's counterclaims about my work schedule and availability for parenting. The judge granted me temporary full custody with supervised visitation for David, pending completion of parenting classes and therapy, a compromise that satisfied neither of us completely. The morning of Ethan's surgery brought both relief and terror. Sitting in the pre-op room holding his small hand, I was struck by how brave he seemed beneath the hospital cap that swallowed his blonde curls. His simple question about whether his heart would be all fixed afterward carried the weight of all our struggles. My mother's quiet presence beside me provided the stability I desperately needed. Her reassurance that both Ethan and I would be fine wasn't the magical certainty of a fairy tale ending, but the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had weathered her own storms. Ethan's surgery was successful, though his recovery wasn't the seamless progression I'd hoped for. Complications with his blood pressure required an extended hospital stay and additional medication. But gradually, day by day, his color improved and his energy returned. The physical healing proved faster than the emotional aftermath. Nightmares about hospitals plagued him for months afterward. A year has passed since Ethan's surgery. His progress has been remarkable, though not without setbacks. Monthly follow-up appointments have decreased to quarterly checkups. He still takes daily medication, but his activity restrictions have been gradually lifted. Last month he played a full soccer game without substitution for the first time, a milestone that had me fighting tears on the sidelines. David completed his court-mandated therapy and parenting classes, and now sees Ethan twice a month for supervised visits. These encounters remain awkward, with Ethan often withdrawn around the father whose absence he still doesn't fully understand. The child support payments arrive mostly on time, though occasionally requiring reminders from our lawyer. My own recovery has been less straightforward. The financial strain of legal fees and remaining medical bills forced me to maintain full-time hours at the hospital longer than I'd planned. Only recently have I been able to reduce to part-time, using evenings, to start MBA classes I'd long postponed. Some nights I still wake up checking the bank accounts on my phone, a habit born of trauma that refuses to fade completely. Our house feels different now, not automatically lighter or happier as I'd sometimes imagined during the worst days of my marriage, but more authentic. There's room for both joy and struggle, for movie nights with popcorn fights, and also difficult conversations about why people sometimes break promises. Ethan and I are learning together how to build a new normal, one that acknowledges both our scars and our strength. Yesterday, Ethan's cardiologist delivered the news we'd been hoping for. His heart function has improved to the point where he's officially considered stable, with significantly reduced medical monitoring needed going forward. We celebrated with ice cream at Dairy Queen, a simple pleasure that once seemed overshadowed by medical concerns. Some people have suggested I was too harsh with David, that everyone deserves a second chance. The reality is more complicated than either absolute forgiveness or complete rejection. When someone shows you who they are in a moment of crisis, especially a crisis involving your child's health, that revelation can't be unseen. Trust, once fundamentally broken, doesn't repair cleanly. The financial aftermath continues to unfold. The court-ordered restitution from David covers about 80% of what was taken, with payments structured over years rather than delivered in a satisfying lump sum of justice. I've established a new account for Ethan's future education, this one with protections and oversight that reflect hard-earned wisdom. Looking back, I recognize that strength isn't about enduring bad situations indefinitely. It's about finding the courage to change them, even when that change brings its own pain and uncertainty. It's about protecting what matters, even when the threat comes from someone who once promised to stand beside you. Most importantly, it's about accepting that happy endings aren't neat and complete. They're ongoing works in progress, rebuilt one day at a time, updated a year later, and we're still finding our way. Ethan is doing better in second grade, though he sometimes struggles with anxiety around health issues. I've started my MBA classes, juggling homework with his soccer practice. For those who've been asking, no, I haven't started dating again. Some have suggested I'm being too cautious, but after what happened, I'm in no rush. Would you be able to trust someone new after experiencing such a profound betrayal from the person who was supposed to be your partner in everything?